requested and $1.8 billion more than the current appropriations level. Yesterday, the House approved a rule that allows for the consideration of 4 major categories of amendments. They include amendments concerning ballistic missile defense, the D-5 missile, the Seawolf submarine, and other countries sharing the costs of U.S. troops abroad. Lawmakers began work on amendments yesterday and will continue their debate on those amendments today. Over on the other side of Capitol Hill, the United States Senate is also in session today. This morning, they passed legislation designed to improve the quality of the nation's drinking water. They are now working on resolving the differences between the House and Senate versions of the crime bill. We will now stand by to await the arrival in the House chamber of House Speaker Thomas Foley or another member of the Democratic leadership to gavel in today's session of the United States House of Representatives.
Speaker.
Mr. Secretary.
The direct Senate formed the House Senators passed S. 1485, Saddle Height Compulsory License Extension Act of 1994, which it concurs the House has requested.
The chair will entertain 15 1-minutes on each side. Is recognized from Texas. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commend President Clinton and Secretary Henry Cisneros for their leadership in finally addressing the homeless problems that this country is facing. All of you as members of the House, when you drove to this Capitol today, you saw people sleeping on the street. We have a serious problem that must be addressed. During the Reagan and Bush years, we saw housing assistance was cut by 78%, elementary and secondary education by 1/3, job training programs by 48%, child nutrition by 19%. We saw many mental institutions beginning to let people out on the streets. Today, nearly 1/3 of the homeless people came from mental institutions. By 1987, the homeless population more than doubled, dropouts increased, teen pregnancy increased, domestic violence increased. Today, we have over 600,000 families in this country are homeless. But the sad part is the fastest growing population among the homeless are children. We have 1.5 million children in this country do not have a home. We're now in the 2nd generation of children growing up in shelters, and 1/3 of those children are not going to school. So, Mr. Speaker, I challenge my colleagues to focus on the problems of homeless in this country.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized. Without objection, so ordered.
The real world, Mr. Speaker, it's tough. When the cost of hiring goes up, as it will, when even the smallest employer has to provide a health plan richer than Xerox's plan, it will simply not be worth hiring a part-time employee or even a full-time employee to do many of the jobs currently done. We all know the employer mandate will cost jobs, but listen to this from the real world. Service industries are currently reviewing new technologies that would allow them to automate their operations. By buying technology now available, a fast food restaurant could cut its staff from 7 people to 2 people. Sitting in my office, they lay out spreadsheets that show the only way they can prevent increasing their prices to consumers is to substitute machines for people. We've already seen automation at the expense of jobs of real people in the manufacturing sector. As costs went up, machines took the jobs of real folks. Further, a retailer recently sat down in my office and showed me how he would have to increase the productivity of his full-time workers. He'd have to have them there when the customers were there. He'd have to have them work 2 hours here, 4 hours there, 2 hours later in the day. Is forcing people into split-shift work patterns wise and good? Is providing policy incentives to substitute technology for real people earning real wages wise and good? I think not. We can reform our health care system. We can address the problems in our health care system without costing jobs. Let's do it now.
The gentleman from West Virginia. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, it's unanimous consent that the proceedings had during the recess be printed in the congressional record, and that all members and former members who spoke during the recess have the privilege of revising and extending their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks and to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, today the House has a chance to correct the long delays and the procedural barriers that have plagued black lung recipients for many years. This is a situation, imagine it, work a mile underground for 30 or 40 years, mining coal and eating coal dust, cough black dust every time that you cough, then apply for the benefits you, pay for your oxygen and medical expenses. Oh, whoops, you have to wait 4 to 7 years. Then you have to run through numerous medical exams, a lot of procedural hoops. A lawyer will not...
428, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 1B of Rule 23, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 2108 to make improvements in the Black Lung Benefits Act. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. Points of order. Consideration of the bill for failure to comply with Section 401B1 of the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and Labor. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule for a period not to exceed 3 hours, excluding time consumed by recorded votes and proceedings incidental thereto. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of H.R. 4415. The amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the amendment of the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Brooks.
The gentleman from Texas.
Speaker, I submit a conference report for printing under the rule.
Clerk will report the title.
Conference report to accompany Senate 24, a bill to reauthorize the independent counsel law for an additional 5 years and for other purposes.
Ordered printed. The gentlewoman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the customary 30 minutes of debate time to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Quillen, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of the resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, House Resolution 428 is an open rule providing for the consideration of H.R. 2108, the Black Lung Benefits Restoration Act. The rule waives Section 401B1 of the Congressional Budget Act against consideration of the bill only. That section of the Budget Act prohibits consideration of a new entitlement authority which becomes effective prior to October 1 of the year in which it is reported. This is a technical waiver which will be corrected by the substitute which this rule will make in order. The original bill as reported from the Committee on Education and Labor did not contain an effective date and therefore theoretically could have allowed spending to occur in the fiscal year 1994. The rule makes in order an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text H.R. 4415 as an original bill for the purpose of amendment. The substitute is identical to the reported bill except for adjustments to include an effective date. Therefore, when the new text is made in order upon passage of the rule, there will not be any Budget Act violation. The substitute shall be considered as read. The rule provides for 1 hour general debate to be equally divided and controlled by the chairman and ranking minority member of the Committee on Education and Labor. The rule further provides for a limit of 3 hours, excluding the time for votes, for consideration of the bill for amendment. Finally, the rule provides for one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Mr. Speaker, H.R. 2108, the bill for which the Rules Committee has recommended this rule, would amend the Black Lung Benefits Act to ensure that the process of determining eligibility for black lung benefits is objective and that beneficiaries and their families and survivors are treated fairly. In a series of oversight hearings since 1990, the Education and Labor Committee discovered that the Black Lung Benefits Program had been restricted to the point where only 5% of minors' claims are approved. The committee heard repeated testimony that retired minors and their families have been terrorized by unscrupulous collection agencies hired by the government to reclaim benefits legally paid to claimants while their cases were on appeal. H.R. 2108 is designed to make the determination of eligibility for black lung benefits fairer and speedier. In addition, the bill would remove the overpayment
Speaker, I thank the gentlelady from New York for yielding, and I'm pleased to rise in support of this open rule, providing for consideration of the Black Lung Benefits Restoration Act. We all know the problems in the coal mining areas which bring about lung disease, and they need help. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that this is an open rule. Unusual indeed, but nevertheless welcome. Although the rule does waive Section 401B and 1 of the Budget Act, it also makes it order substitute text containing an October the 1st, 1994 effective date. Therefore, upon adoption of this rule, there will be no violation of the Budget Act. The Black Lung Program provides monetary reimbursements to current and former coal miners who are totally disabled by black lung disease. The program also provides benefits from dependents and survivors. There are many problems with the current program. It's extremely difficult for claimants to obtain benefits.
Indicated that is a technical objection, yes, but it's a real problem, the waiving pay-go for an entitlement program, because part of the deep problems of the Black Lung Benefits Act is indeed the fact that the trust fund, which represents all of those owners who can't be found and who have to react to a workman's compensation claim from the miners of America who are suffering from black lung disease, that Black Lung Fund is $4 billion in debt and has been bailed out by the taxpayers once before by waiving interest for years. And that is a deep, deep problem which we will be discussing later. So I would have hoped that we would have faced that before bringing this to the floor and at least be able to take the roughly $200 million of added expense on the Black Lung Fund and at least cut in other areas in the under the domain of education and labor, so that there will not be a threat upon the various allocations which the committee has already set forth for 1995. But we do rejoice in having an open rule. I think that's fine. A lot of us believe this is a very important act. Unfortunately, Congress has been a terrible, terrible insurer, you might say, which is what the Black Lung Fund is, for the Workmen's Compensation Act, known as the Black Lung Benefits Act. And we, if we were in private business, we long ago would have been closed and bankrupt and ridiculed for the terrible job that Congress has done in handling. But I'll come in the debate, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
I'd like to advise the gentleman from Tennessee that I have two requests for time, and for the first one I would like to yield for the purposes of debate only 5 minutes to the Gentleman from Pennsylvania and the chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentlelady from New York for the time she has allowed me to speak on the rule. I also compliment the Rules Committee for expeditiously moving this very important measure forward, and also thank my minority ranking and other members in not delaying the matter in subcommittee and full committee, but cooperating through an amendment process, which I'm pleased they failed. But at least we had their cooperation in expeditiously considering and moving the matter forward. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to approve House Resolution 428, the rule providing for consideration of H.R. 2108, the Black Lung Benefits Restoration Act of 1994. After receiving testimony from the majority and minority members of the Education and Labor Committee, the Committee on Rules earlier this week approved H.R. 428 and now recommends its adoption by the House. I support that recommendation of the Committee on Rules and its prompt adoption. The gentlelady from New York has very adequately explained what the rule does and the necessity of structuring it in that manner and allowing my substitute as included in the rule, which perfects the rule from any budgetary problems. We therefore are in compliance with the Budget Act, Section 401B1, with the rule that has been submitted. We have also agreed to the minority requests at the Rules Committee that they be granted an open rule. Although we did not believe that was necessary, we felt that the minority had the right to offer any amendments as of the time we meet. Therefore, they having secured their way in the Rules Committee with our acquiescence, I assume that the minority will now respectfully request their cooperation in the approval of the rule, and then we can get on with the debate of the matters in the measure. So I thank you and yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Wise.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this rule and strong support of this bill, because I think it's time, it's justice long overdue. It's not complete justice. It won't take care of all the inequities, but it's a start. It's a start, for instance, for those claimants who have been in this process year after year after year.
For time, all times being yielded back. Without objection, previous question is ordered. Question is on the resolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion chair, the ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. The reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to House Resolution 428 and Rule 23, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of the bill H.R. 2108. The Chair appoints the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Wise, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the consideration of the bill H.R. 2108, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to make improvements in the Black Lung Benefits Act.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, will be recognized for 30 minutes, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Faywell, will be recognized for 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, or the gentleman from Michigan. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, the full committee chair.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of H.R. 2108, the Black Lung Benefits Restoration Act of 1993. It's dated 1993 because it's been in process for quite some time. This bill is essentially the same one which passed the House near the end of the last Congress, and that bill was severely scaled back to meet both substantive and budgetary considerations. There are many provisions that we left out of this bill that I personally favored. We gave them up to get a bill that could and should pass the House of Representatives. Black lung is an occupational disease that destroys the lives of those who mine coal, on which this country depends. It's a savage disease that debilitates tens of thousands of once strong and energetic miners by denying them the very breath of life. No one who has visited the coal fields of this country can deny the horrible consequences of pneumoconiosis. In 1969, under the leadership of our good friend John Dent, who cared deeply for the people of the coal fields, we passed the first Black Lung Act as part of the Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act of 1969. The need for a compensation program.
The gentleman from Illinois.
Oh, he's going to handle it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would yield myself 10 minutes and see where I am after that's consumed. Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to H.R. 2108. I first of all want to say that all of us here today are committed to responsible stewardship of the Black Lung Benefits Program and with its basic purpose as a workers' compensation program, something of which I think we lose sight of from time to time, designed to provide payments to disabled miners based on a clear showing of employment-related medical disability. Unfortunately, H.R. 2108 would move the program far beyond congressional intent concerning the Black Lung Benefits Act and indeed move us backward to the 70s. Most people by now have forgotten that this $1.5 billion per year program was a last-minute addition. Indeed, an afterthought to the 1969 Federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act, a law concerned primarily with the technical safety requirements of coal mines.
In the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of H.R. 4415 is considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment and is considered as read. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule for a period not to exceed 3 hours, excluding time consumed by recorded votes and proceedings incidental thereto. Are there any amendments to the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. Will the gentleman identify which amendment he's referring to?
On page 11, beginning in line 22.
The clerk will report
An
the
amendment
amendment.
offered by Mr. Boehner of Ohio on page 11, beginning on line 22. Strike subsection B and insert subsections B and C, and on page 12, add after line 6 the following. C, Black Lung Disability Trust Fund. The amendments made by this act shall not take effect unless the total indebtedness of the Black Disability Trust Fund is less than $600 million.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues. Over 200,000 American citizens suffer from black lung disease. And this disease disables the respiratory system and is irreversible. And for those who suffer from black lung, they most often die from cardiac arrest. And it's the sad fate of the people who provide...
Mr. Chairman, I rise to oppose the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since fiscal year 1990, the coal tonnage, I remind my colleagues that the Black Lung program is paid for by an excise tax on each ton of coal that is mined in the United States, either by the deep or surface mine method.
To support...
Having voted nay, the amendment fails. Are there further amendments to the bill? The gentleman from Pennsylvania, but if the gentleman would suspend. The chair requests order in the House. The next amendment will be brought before the House. Members to the chair's left and to the chair's right would take their conversations to the cloakroom so the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Goodling, can be heard. The gentleman may proceed. For what purpose is the gentleman from Pennsylvania?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment offered by Mr. Goodling of Pennsylvania on page 11, beginning on line 22, strike.
That the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection, if the gentleman would suspend. The House is not in order. The House will come to order. Gentleman is recognized for his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I merely want to say that the administration's position on H.R. 2108 agrees with my amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time. Or I yield back.
The gentleman, for what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania arise?
Mr. Chairman, briefly to oppose the amendment, but mostly to request the ranking member of the committee to answer a couple of questions I may have on the amendment. At the present time, Mr. Goodling, the income from the tonnage on coal is sufficient to pay the current benefits that are being paid. There's also additional surplus in that, and I guess as I understand your amendment, it merely states that the excise tax on the coal that's being paid will be sufficient to pay the benefits, the benefit payments, until the year 1999. Is that correct? Basically, what it is indicating is that we follow the pay-go procedure of the Budget Act. Well, and so I think the answer to your question is yes. If the answer, of course, is yes, then I have no objection to the gentleman's amendment, because the excise tax now and in the future should provide sufficient benefits to pay benefits. But I would want to make sure that it does not now state that we then have to impose an additional tax on the coal operators to deal with the trust fund deficit, which is something we've been debating all morning. The reason I couldn't give you a totally unqualified yes was simply because of CBO and their scoring procedures and so on. But in my estimation, the answer would be yes. With that understanding, I, on behalf of the chairman of my committee, will accept the amendment, but also would respectfully address the gentleman and say that we may want to explore this in conference committee, and I would hope that my arrangement with the gentleman stands for today's acceptance, providing that you and I have the same understanding. Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, we'll accept the amendment.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back the balance of his time. Is there further discussion upon the amendment? Question is on the amendment. All those in favor shall say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there further amendments to the bill? The gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. Would the gentleman please identify the page? You have several amendments at the desk, of course.
Yes. How does it say? It is the amendment referring to Section 3, evidence.
An amendment offered by Mr. Faywell of Illinois, strike Section 3, redesignate Section 4 through 11 as Sections 3 through 10, and on page 12, line 1, strike 6, each place it appears, and insert 5.
Before the gentleman is recognized in behalf of his amendment, I would ask that he suspend. The House is not in order. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in behalf of his amendment.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Chairman, this amendment would delete Section 3, which is the evidence section, so-called. The bill proposes a radical change to black lung administrative law by placing, for the first time, I might add, restrictions on the presentation of evidence by employers and by the Black Lung Trust Fund.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Secretary.
Speaker, I've been directed by the Senate to quote the House. Senate has passed 2087 to extend the time period for the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act.
The committee will resume its sitting.
Committee will be in order. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Ohio. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I wasn't going to speak on the bill, and while they're working out their differences, I'd just like to make a few comments. It's evident that we have a committee, subcommittee, and committee that brought to the floor legislation that seems to be friendly to an American worker's interest.
Gentleman from California. I mean Texas.
Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read the amendment.
An amendment offered by Mr. Army of Texas. Strike Section 6 on page 11, line 22.
Mr. Chairman.
Strike A.
That's it. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman, I wonder if I can have order.
Please be in order. Will members kindly take their conversations off the floor so the gentleman may proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, once again we have a bill before us that is not accurately named. The bill is named the Black Lung Benefits Restoration Act when in fact it is a Black Lung Benefits Enhancement Act. But be that as it may, the bill creates more problems than it solves. It already has been stated that the bill reported out of committee is one which places too heavy a burden on mine operators.
If there are no further amendments, the question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Under the rule, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Initial here. Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2108, and pursuant to House Resolution number 428, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2108, and pursuant to House Resolution number 428, reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is a separate vote demanded on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole? If not, the question is on the adoption of the amendment. So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Question is on engrossment and third reading. In favor say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to make improvements in the Black Lung Benefits Act.
Question is on final passage. All in favor say aye. What purpose, gentleman from Illinois, rise?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The gentleman opposed to the bill?
Yes, I am.
The gentleman qualified. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Faywell of Illinois moves to recommit the bill H.R. 2108 to the Committee on Education and Labor.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion.
Can't hear you. I wonder if we could...
I am putting the question on the motion. There is no debate. The previous question was ordered. All in favor of the motion would vote aye. Opposed, nay. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The motion is not agreed to. The question is on passage of the bill. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Gentleman from Illinois.
I ask for a recorded vote.
Those in favor of a recorded vote will kindly rise. Apparently a sufficient number. A recorded vote is ordered. All members will vote aye or oppose nay, and the vote will be by electronic device. This vote, the yeas being 252, the nays 166. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker.
What purpose, gentleman, Pennsylvania rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous matters on the bill just passed.
Without objection, so ordered. What purpose, the gentleman from North Carolina rise? Gentleman, North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I present a privilege report for printing under the rule.
Clerk will report the title.
A report to accompany H.R. 4453, a bill making appropriations for military construction for the Department of Defense for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 1995, and for other purposes.
Mr. Speaker, do we say this?
Gentlewoman from Nevada.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve all points of order.
Refer to the Union calendar and ordered printed. Gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I present a privilege report for printing under the rule.
Clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany H.R. 4454, a bill making appropriations for the legislative branch for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 1995, and for other purposes.
Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, on that I reserve all points of order.
Refer to Union calendar and ordered printed. What purpose, gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to take from the Speaker's table the bill S-2087 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 2087, an act to extend the time period for compliance with the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act of 1990 for certain food products packaged prior to August 8, 1994.
Is there objection to the consideration of the bill?
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Virginia.
Reserving the right to object. And
Gentleman is recognized under his reservation.
Mr. Speaker, I shall not object, but I take this reservation for the purpose of asking the gentleman from California to explain the reason for this request.
I thank the gentleman for raising the issue and to yield to me. The final regulations for the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act of 1990 became effective on May 8th of this year. The implementation of this act represents a magnificent achievement on the part of the federal government and American industry. It will greatly benefit consumers. The vast majority of companies have been able to meet the May 8 deadline. However, there are a number of companies that have sought a 3-month extension of the deadline, either because of the backlog in printing labels or because they have a large inventory of containers and labels that do not comply with the new laws. We have been informed that these containers and labels are worth millions of dollars and perhaps tens of millions of dollars. This bill will grant a 3-month extension for compliance with the NLEA with respect to certain products. This brief extension will allow companies to use this excess inventory, but will not in any way undercut the basic benefits of the NLEA, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill.
Further reserving the right to object, Mr. Speaker. This is a good bill. We support it, and I withdraw my reservation.
Without objection, the bill is read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Purpose, gentleman from Massachusetts, rise.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman may proceed without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the Rules Committee is scheduled to meet during the week of May 23rd to grant rules for the following bills. H.R. 4385, the National Highway System Designation Act of 1994, the Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 1995, and the Legislative Branch Appropriations for fiscal year 1995. The committee may report rules which would permit only those floor amendments designated in the particular rule for the particular bill. The committee has circulated individual dear colleagues outlining the parameters for submission of amendments for each bill. For H.R. 4385, the National Highway System Designation Act of 1994, the committee requests that 55 copies of each amendment to the bill be submitted to the Rules Committee May 23rd. It's my understanding that the Public Works and Transportation Committee will file H.R. 4385 sometime today. Copies of the text of the bill are currently available at the Public Works and Transportation Committee at 2165 Rayburn for members who intend to offer their amendments to H.R. 4385. Regarding our plans with respect to Foreign Operations Appropriations Act for fiscal year 1995, members should submit 55 copies of their amendment no later than 12 noon on Tuesday, May 24th. And finally, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Legislative Branch Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 1995, filed this afternoon, the committee requests that members interested in offering amendments to the bill submit 55 copies of their amendment to the Rules Committee no later than 5 p.m. on Tuesday, May 24th. It's my understanding, Mr. Speaker, that copies of the bills will be available to members and staff preparing amendments in the Appropriations Committee office located in room H218 of the Capitol building on the afternoon of Friday, May 20th. One copy of each of the bills will be made available to members' offices only. We appreciate the cooperation of all members in our effort to be fair and orderly in granting each of the 3 rules.
Speaker, will the gentleman yield for just a brief question?
Very happy to yield to my colleague from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to inquire as to whether or not this is the beginning of a process in which we will be considering rules on all appropriations bills. Is there any indication as to whether or not this is a pattern that has begun? Because it's something that does concern me in light of the fact that appropriations are privileged resolutions, which frankly can come straight to the floor here.
As you may recall, because the gentleman from California has such an extensive memory, that there are only 2 appropriation bills that were structured last year, and 2 of the 3 are here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Gentleman from California have a request. wish to be recognized? Pursuant to House Resolution 429 and Rule 23, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of the bill H.R. 4301. Will the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Durbin, kindly assume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of the bill H.R. 4301, which the